Hello, you wonderful people. So for today's video, it's actually kind of interesting because I actually kind of picked the perfect time to kind of make this video, but obviously we're discussing Martin Scorsese's comments about superhero movies, more specifically the Marvel ones. And the reason why I say it's, interesting time because literally, more like, he kind of commented more on the subject recently, kind of basically, as people kind of put it, doubling down, which at the end of the day, I'm going to be frank and say like, hey, I don't got no bad blood towards Martin Scorsese. He's a great filmmaker and he's entitled to his own opinion. I mean, because it just, because I'm someone that, like, obviously for him, he has his opinion of just like, and it's not an opinion he's the only one that shares. A lot of people had this thing of like, well, for one, he goes as far as saying like he doesn't think the Marvel MCU movies are cinema. They're just these theme park rides type of situation. Obviously, that's reflective of a lot of people who think like, some people think that, they're ruining all the other movies around them because it's hard to make, other movies and get eyeballs on certain movies because all people care about superhero movies. And it comes down to just what people are into. To me, I've never been like, I don't consider myself like a cinema buff or like, I consider myself, because I barely, like, over the course of my life, I've never been like, oh, like the biggest into watching movies. TV has always kind of been my avenue, especially as I've gotten older. I've always leaned more towards TV. That's just my preferred like avenue when it comes to, viewing a story or whatever. So, but at the end of the day, like, I am in that category of those people who like watch only superhero movies, because I mainly watch superhero movies, which isn't to take away from all the other amazing movies out there. That's just who I am. It's actually something I try to make more an effort to going forward. I want to try and watch other movies because there's so many great stories I'm not being, not having told to me just because I'm not watching these specific movies. It's just what I gravitate to more because that's where my interests lie, at the end of the day. But like I said, it doesn't take away from, in my personal opinion, and just for me, just because I enjoy these movies, it shouldn't take away from the other movies that are around these superhero movies. But I get the argument of like, it's a complicated thing because these movies draw so much more attention than all these other movies around them. So that's the whole thing in itself. It's actually kind of interesting because obviously this ties in, actually, like I said, many people have talked about it. It's even like Bill Maher, like many months ago, made a whole comment about the fact is that it's like comic books are kind of a kid thing, which is an argument. I'd make that same argument about cartoon animation in general. A lot of people will think, well, just because something's animated, it's for kids. It's something I know my parents feel like that, just because, like, well, in particular, my mom, she doesn't like anything animated. It's like, oh, I was like, oh, this is anime, oh, good, whatever. I mean, to be fair, she's got her particular taste in movies and stuff like that too, but it's just because in their mind, they think like anything animated is just a kid thing, which, yeah, it tends to be, but animation is just a style which a story can be told. Like, to me, I think one of the best animated series out there is Avatar: The Last Airbender, which isn't to take away from Korra. It's just like the fact of the matter is I'm more familiar with Avatar: The Last Airbender because I've seen all of it. I've never seen all of Korra. I've only seen one season of Korra, which I still got to circle back around to that at some point in time. But nevertheless, that tells such a compelling story. It's very actiony, adventure, fantasy story with such heavy lore and very like characters with deep backgrounds. Like, I've talked about it constantly. Like, there's a moral element to that show that I'm like, I feel like as a kid you wouldn't necessarily appreciate. As an adult looking back, I'm like, holy crap, how deep that is. Once again, Aang as an airbender and what people are telling him, like, this is the only path to defeating the Fire Lord is to do this one specific thing. Obviously, I don't want to go into spoilers if you haven't seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, but like, everyone tells Aang, you need to do this one thing, but it goes against everything that he believes. And I think that's such a heavy thing because Aang is like, what, 12? Or something, like, at that point in the series, 12 or 13. So it's like putting that, literal weight of the world on this kid's shoulders. And there's so much gravitas to the show, and just that, clashing between what you need to do to help and save people versus your own beliefs. That's such a complicated moral dilemma he finds himself in. And I'm like, that's in what someone might consider a kid's cartoon because it was animated and it was on Nickelodeon, but that show had its own dark themes and it just happened to be it's in an animated format. One of my favorite movies, I consider both just all across the board, animated or live action, it is my favorite film, Princess Mononoke. That movie will always have a special place in my heart. And a similar thing about, I said about Avatar could be said about Princess Mononoke. It's not like a pretty dark movie, especially with everything. You know, it's one of those things where I just appreciate it as it is, you know, just because it's one of the few movies I can honestly say I've watched over a dozen times. It's actually something I've kind of been circling back to and being like, oh, I should actually take time to actually rewatch it as an adult, because I think I'd appreciate it even more as an adult, because there's certain themes I probably wouldn't have gotten as a kid. But like, I've never watched any movie as much as I've ever watched Princess Mononoke, because that movie just has a special place in my heart. It tells such an amazing fantasy story, and there's so many layers to it. Like, thinking back to it now, I think I could, like, you know, have a different perspective on it as an adult, but I want to watch it to make sure, like, oh, like, maybe I'm not misremembering certain things about it. But regardless, I'm kind of going on this huge tangent, but like, that's the parallels I've always made, because I've talked about that before, about like how animation isn't just for kids, and the same thing for superhero stuff. Like I said, circling back to Bill Maher's comments at the time. And so, but hey, like, at the end of the day, I'm not shitting on him. I'm just saying that's his personal opinion. He could have been joking. He could have been serious about really feeling that way. It's like, you can feel however you want to. But even kind of circling back to what Martin Scorsese says, it's kind of interesting, because it's like, it's almost kind of saying like, oh, it's like, because he almost makes it seem like superhero movies don't have almost depth to them, that there's no like emotion, like that the emotional thing is just kind of like, because there are these big roller coasters and stuff like that. But like, those movies have such impact. Like, it's not just, people don't just stay invested because it's just like, oh, blockbuster, oh, explosion and stuff. Like, no, those movies have heart. Like, Endgame playing out the way it did is because you follow this character of Tony Stark since 2008 till this moment in 2019. That's investment into this character, their future, their story, and not just them, but the world that's built around them. There's so much lore, and you know, so there's a lot of weight and not just enjoyment, you know, because obviously I think it's just because some people look at it because it is such a popcorn flick, which, you know, I think a lot of times it has a negative connotation to it. But, you know, it's just like, just because it's a quote-unquote popcorn flick doesn't take away from the heart that is there, that it can get you thinking about things. You know, I mean, the thought of, like, you know, I mean, even like Thanos's philosophy of his understanding why he's doing what he's done, that's actually kind of an interesting motivation for a villain of like, I'm doing the universe justice because I'm doing what others aren't willing to do to make sure that we don't end up kind of, you know, running out of resources. You know, like his justifications for stuff, that's such a very interesting thing that obviously, like, not necessarily you can make parallels to real life. I mean, maybe you could, but it's, there's a level of being like, you don't agree with why he does what he does with his reasoning for collecting the Infinity Stones, but at the very least you can get inside of his head of like, you can understand why he believes that's the only option. So it's just one of those things. Because I'm also curious, because obviously the statements have always been towards the MCU movies, because obviously like it's this 23 long film franchise / arc that's many of which the movies have grossed over, you know, over $1 billion in some regards. So they're the ones that garnish the biggest attention. But I am curious, like, what does he feel about like DC stuff? Because like, even taking like Dark Knight trilogy, like, because a lot of people will separate that from like, you know, because they'll say like, you know, just because a lot of people would be like, you know, Marvel's kind of got their formula, so like everything kind of feels the same. Obviously there's outliers for some people, whether it be something like Guardians of the Galaxy, so on and so forth. But I'm curious, like, what is his opinion about the Dark Knight movies? Because for a lot of people, it's not just like a Batman story. It's just like in general for people, like, those are good films. So would you consider them not cinema, or is that different from, you know, what's happening, you know, with the MCU? Like, because I feel like it's almost like you're taking away from like, oh, I don't know, like defining certain things as cinema, because a lot of people kind of fire back to be like, well, cinema is, you know, is it a movie theater? It's cinema, it's a movie, but I would say everyone's got their own definition of, you know, what cinema. I mean, would he consider Joker cinema? Which is interesting because a lot of people make comparisons to his own movies. You know, was it The King of Comedy, or, you know, Taxi Driver? Because Joker has an aesthetic, a lot of people make comparisons saying like, oh, there's very like style lies and certain elements of their story kind of feel similar. So would he say the same thing about Joker? Would Joker not be considered a, you know, cinema? Would it not be considered cinema in his eyes? And like I said, going back to like the Dark Knight, I mean, because, you know, a lot of people will tell you like Batman's a very interesting hero because he is this man without powers and trying to fix his broken city, essentially. Like, I mean, every superhero's got their own motivations and stuff like that. And that's another thing too, like, because the fact of the matter is, it's never just one person that's writing a character. There's been so many different people who've done their own interpretations of Batman, of Superman, so on and so forth. So, you know, some storylines are darker than others, you know, and I think obviously that's something they brought to the screen, especially when it comes to Joker, but I think also very much so when it comes to the Nolan Batman movies, because obviously, you know, the similarities between Nolan's Batman movies as well as Joker is the fact is that they're kind of grounded in reality. Like the more supernatural or science fictional angles of Batman's storyline, like whether it be like a lot of his villains, were never tapped necessarily in the Nolan movies. Obviously there's a bit of a scientific angle if you want to think about like technology in certain regards, but more often than not, it's just like they're allocated to just being kind of very grounded movies. But even more so in the case of Joker, it even being a period piece in, you know, in some regards, well, in actual regard. Like I said, my point isn't to try and, you know, take away, you know, like shit on someone just because of their opinion. They're entitled to feel the way they are because he is a filmmaker. His definition of, you know, because he's even clarified basically being like, that's how he feels, you know. But like I said, it's still interesting because he does double down, which I'm like, hey, double down, because that's how you feel. You shouldn't have to compromise how you personally view things just because other people might not agree. I 100% don't agree, but you make the argument, aren't I super biased because I'm super into superhero movies and stuff like that? Yes. So, but it still doesn't take away the fact is that these movies shouldn't be allocated as not just being cinema. They cannot be your thing, and that's totally 100% okay. Because I talk about it because there's plenty of things I'm into that I know that doesn't resonate with a lot of people. I'm into video games. I know that's not in, like, you know, the same thing. Not everyone's into video games. And even when it comes to video games, I'm not into video games that other people are. Some people are into FPSs. FPSs has just never been my thing. I'm super into JRPGs. That is super not everyone's thing. Some people downright hate JRPGs, which I'm like, you're entitled to feel what you want to. Even TV shows and movie-wise, like it comes down to your particular taste and your you know, your style, you know. So like his style is like, hey, I don't see these as cinema, which I don't agree, but it's like, you know, to each their own. That's I think the thing that people kind of gravitate to most is the fact is him saying that they're not cinema, you know. If he had, you know, which he, like I said, he's clarified that, you know, that's just how he feels. But, you know, like I said, I just kind of want to put my own opinion to the whole situation because it's an interesting discussion. Like I said, it kind of all culminates back to, like I said, the whole point of like even like, oh, animation is for kids or comic books are for kids. Because I can't even understand that because I think, you know, kind of going back to what, you know, I was talking about earlier with Bill Maher. He might be under the impression of like, oh, comic books are just for kids, which like I said, different people have had their different interpretation of certain characters. So like I said, some storylines have been darker than others, but he might just think like, oh, comic books are just, you know, superhero stories, which is like, no, there are dark comic books out there, like Happy, for example. That is, I love that TV show. That's based on a graphic novel, and it's like, you know, / comic book. If the comic book is anything like the TV show, which I'm pretty sure it is, that's kind of like a wild out there show that you're like, yeah, you wouldn't show that to kids. Same thing to Preacher. Preacher is hands down one of my favorite TV shows, and that's based on a graphic novel. Literally on that same line, because the same dude, Garth Ennis, who wrote Preacher, also wrote The Boys, that the comic book that the Amazon TV show is based on. That's definitely not for kids, and you can make the argument that kind of subverts your expectation. It kind of takes the superhero genre and kind of flips it, and you can borderline be like a very nihilistic approach. Not necessarily nihilistic, but very pessimistic approach to superheroes, which apparently, I didn't know this, but I've heard people say that that's kind of what Garth Ennis kind of does. He kind of hates superheroes, so he kind of puts them in shitty lights or whatever. But regardless of that, you know, so it's like, like I said, it's just that preconceived notion that some people who might be older might just kind of look at something like, oh, that's just for kids. And it's like, that's not the case. And even if something is for kids, that doesn't mean there isn't something an adult can still look at and be like, oh, wow, that's a powerful lesson that's being imbued in my child's head without them realizing until they get older and realizing like how heavy that is. Like, you know, because like I said, kids stuff can handle, you know, very adult themes, obviously, without going too nuts with it in very interesting ways, as I've kind of, you know, mentioned before, referencing Avatar: The Last Airbender. So like I said, at the end of the day, these are just my opinions. In the comments down below, I'd love to get to know yours, especially where you would stand on it. I mean, there might be some people who watch this who might go, I kind of agree with Martin Scorsese. You know, you may, I mean, hell, superhero movies might not even be your thing, and that's totally fine. I just want to hear people's discussion about this. Like I said, this is just something that's kind of been rattling off my head. I've actually heard a few people kind of discuss their opinions about it, so I'd love to get to know yours. Really, that's all I want to talk about. Till next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, enjoy it. Good day and good